Well, thank you everyone for attending, those that have arrived. We're going to be talking today about responsible consumerism. The title, From Shopping Carts to Sustainable Hearts. I did not come up with that, it's very catchy, whoever did. And I think, responsible consumerism might sound like an oxymoron, but hopefully we can dissect that a little bit today with some great panelists. My name is Martin Baker. I'm Director with Local Investing LIYYC. For those that don't know Local Investing LIYYC, we're a for-profit investment co-op here in Calgary, and we raise community capital both from retail investors, everyday Calgarians, as well as institutional investors, and we deploy that into purpose-led businesses locally that are driving social, environmental change, and also a financial return for our investors. To date, we have raised over $1.7 million. We've invested that into 10 businesses, 2 of which are on our panel here today, which is great. And we are currently in the midst of a capital raise as well. We'll be closing in a couple of weeks, but if there's any interest in becoming an investor, you can speak to myself. We have Bob here as well from Local Investing. We can share more information. So the session brief, the consumer industry, it's really thrived on a make waste society. We're hitting our planetary boundaries. We're in the midst of a climate crisis. We're in the midst of a biodiversity crisis, and we seem to want to consume more and more and more. I think this conversation is really timely to consider what does it mean to both produce and consume responsibly. And so, to get started, I would just invite each of the panelists to introduce themselves, let us know your story, who you work for, and really what it is you do and how that is contributing to sustainable consumption production. Maybe we can start with you, David.
Sure, thanks. My name is David Dial, and I'm the CEO of Grow Pure Harvest. We are a total controlled environment agriculture company, growing strawberries in Alberta 365 days a year. I'm the third generation Calgarian. I ran my own consulting firm for 30 years before becoming the CEO of Grow Pure in September of 2021. The idea of what we're trying to do in terms of growing locally and supplying fresh produce locally has a lot of different effects, but if we look at it just in sort of impact reduction, we use 32 times less land, so our land efficiency is much higher, 20% less water consumed, 70 times in reduction of shipping distance, and about an 8 times reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So on the surface of those things, it's great, but what we're also doing is we're providing higher quality produce for people at a local level. That is good for everyone.
Excellent. Why don't we pass it over to Jason?
Thank you. I'm Jason Carniff, CEO and co-founder of Clean02. Our company is dedicated towards the reduction and eventual elimination of greenhouse gases from the heating sector. What places us in a unique category is that we're the only company in the world at this scale that's producing technology that can have an effective way of reducing greenhouse gas emissions from gas-fired heating appliances while supporting the circular economy. So we take these carbon emissions, we turn it into a chemical commodity that's used in a number of industries, most notably is the personal care industry. So we convert carbon emissions into carbonates. Carbonates then go into things like soaps and detergents, hair care products, even automotive and fertilizers. And we've been very successful with it to date. So, thank you.
And finally, we'll pass it over to Brad.
Great, thank you. So I'm Brad Krzan. I serve on the board of the Calgary Co-op, serve as the board chair currently. So a little bit about us. We were actually founded in 1956 and opened our first store to really focus on selling products produced by local farmers and ranchers, so kind of a farm-to-table approach. Our approach has always been that we source a significant amount of our products for our stores through, from surrounding Calgary area in Alberta and in Western Canada. We are one of the largest retail cooperatives in North America. We've got over 400,000 members and over 3,500 employees. We're about a $1.3 billion enterprise, so we do create a fairly significant amount of impact within the region. And we have about $700 million worth of assets. And as it relates to this topic, obviously we are the sales side related to the consumer piece. Bulk of our products are all essential service oriented. Things related to healthcare, home healthcare, pharmacy, food, obviously, and there's essential services. So that's what we're about.
Thank you. I think it's great that we have a panel where two of you are working on the production side of food and products, and then yourself at the Calgary Co looking at procurement and really what's how those procurement practices might be changing, what consumers are demanding. I wanted to kind of start us off with one of Canada's Sustainable Development Goals. So for those that aren't familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN came together with partnering countries and has developed 17 what they call Sustainable Development Goals that really are focused on what it means to have a sustainable future, what sustainable development really looks like. Sustainable Development Goal number 17 I think it's 12, is really around responsible consumption and production. One of Canada's targets is that by 2030, we must ensure that people everywhere have the relevant information and awareness for sustainable development and lifestyles in harmony with nature. And I think about myself as somebody who has a background in sustainability, and even I find it difficult, when I'm purchasing things. I don't know if am I being greenwashed? Is my purchase actually having an impact? Is it responsible? And so a question to all of you is, what do you think we need if we're to achieve that goal in Canada? Maybe start with you, Jason.
One of the earlier challenges that we were faced with when we deployed our technology was engagement. How do you take very dry subject matter like carbon capture and make it relatable to everybody? And that's where I think we accelerated, was being able to take something intangible and turn it into something that was tangible. So I think what we need to see is more storytelling, more tangible stories that can be relayed to the general public to understand what it is we're trying to accomplish. Like it's easy to say we're trying to be sustainable, we're trying to take better care of our planet, we're trying to support the circular economy. What does that mean then? And if you're just an average person with an average job and an average life, and you're trying to incorporate some of that into your own life, if you're not given a pathway, then you're lost and you don't really know how to engage. So I think all of us in the sustainable markets need to do a better job of creating tangible pathways that can engage communities.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. David, folks?
We follow on with that. I think awareness is a huge piece. I think that we're basically taking nature indoors, right? So we create the ideal summer day for strawberries every day, right? That's the idea of what we're trying to do. And a lot of people still look at us and go, I didn't realize you could do that. I didn't realize when the technology was there, we would be able to do this, and that the product that you get out of it is so great. So I think being able to help people understand that the more we support this and understand it, the more we're going to get towards that vision, right? Because that's really is a vision. I don't think it's something we're going to attain 100% of any time, but it's understanding how can we take different pieces of what we're doing in the economy and go towards that larger vision.
Mm-hmm. And I have to ask, why strawberries? Why was that the product of choice?
Strawberries are a high value cultivar, so they're not easy to grow. We spent 4 years trying to figure out how to grow strawberries inside of a total controlled environment. We figured out how to do that. Now the trick is to do it at scale, commercial scale, which we're right on the cusp of doing. But we love strawberries. It's just Canada in 2021 imported 321 million pounds of strawberries. In Alberta, we import about 33 million pounds of strawberries a year. And that's not just us. I mean, if you think about strawberries, and I'm just a big strawberry guy, which is what calls me. California produces about 1.8 billion pounds of strawberries a year. Mexico, 1.2 billion pounds of strawberries a year. And worldwide, we produce over 20 billion pounds of strawberries. We just love strawberries. So it's just a great cultivar to do.
Great. And Brad, any thoughts on reaching that goal where everyone is informed by 2030?
Well, I mean, we are in the information side of it. I mean, if you go into our stores, you certainly see what products are locally sourced. We promote things, you know, and it's a range of things. It's, you know, whether it's during the summer season and there's fresh growers coming in from the agricultural community within Alberta, British Columbia, Saskatchewan. Or if it's things like, you know, meat products that come in and they're locally sourced. So it's right on our labeling. We've built, you know, some targeted branding around it with our calendars and with our founders and farmers that, you know, really is intended to highlight what is, you know, required locally and that we're selling within our stores. So we are part of that communication channel. And, you know, put a shameless plug-in for us. I mean, I think we are far more overt about it because of the nature of us as a cooperative than, say, some of our competitors are.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, what do you think the role of government is in this? You know, we're talking around, you know, as being in the sustainability space as producers, suppliers, practitioners. If we really are to reach that goal where everyone has this awareness, what role does government play?
Great question, because you know, I'll tie this back a bit to, you know, part of what co-ops get formed is because they see a gap and the members come together to fill that gap. And, you know, I'm of the view that sometimes I think governments may be part of the problem with excessive regulation and creating almost more barriers that make it a bit more cumbersome for more local production and more local support of businesses. So I think one of the things they need to do is find ways to support, but get out of the way and support more from the background. And, you know, I don't know that incentives or what those need to look like, but for sure they need to let the entrepreneurial spirit, I think, flow forward and create more opportunity. I think that's a big piece of it, particularly at this juncture. I'm not, you know, a policy expert by any stretch, and certainly, you know, the way the world's evolved with a very integrated global supply chain network. I mean, you know, federal and all of us as a government end up being drawn into touching them. So I don't know what needs to be done in terms of policy and things like that. There certainly are opportunities for some level of support or investment through some agencies that provide funding to businesses. I think that's one way they can support. But yeah, clearing red tape and getting out of the way so that the entrepreneurs in this space can move a lot faster, I think is an important part.
Jason, I see some nodding there. Do you have some comments?
Yeah, I have to echo a lot of what you're saying. To get out of the way, I think is really important. But also, you know, being that we're tied to the energy sector and it trickles down into consumer goods, it's the polarity of things. Rarely are problems ever, you know, polarized. They're usually, they require a multifaceted approach to solve any problem. So the solution should also be multifaceted. So whether it's, you know, whether it's sustainable or not sustainable, whether it's, you know, a green product or not a green product, whether it's, you know, the oil and gas sector or electrification. I think all of these things require a multifaceted approach to creating a solution. And I think government can do a better job of helping support industries that are trying to depolarize consumer goods or the things, even things in the energy markets.
Great. David, question for you. Can you describe some of the challenges that you faced producing, manufacturing, you know, responsible products? And what should other product innovators be aware of in this space?
You know, I think that probably the biggest challenge is achieving a commercial scale. So you can go around and see a lot of innovation that happens at a small scale, and I think people are proving the concept. There's a big difference between that stage and being able to get to a commercial production stage. So if you look at us at our facility in Northwest Evanston, we would be, you know, producing something like 1.2 million pounds of strawberries in 16,000 square feet per year. That represents less than 2% of the Alberta strawberry market. Okay? Yet it's commercial scale. Getting to that commercial scale is a difficult stage, and what it really takes is it takes investment. And I think that it's making sure you understand not only what your innovation is and what the technology is, and people get really fixated on technology, but it's also, is there a business behind the technology, right? What's your market? How are you going to access that market? How are you going to actually get yourself there to a commercial scale so that you can start to do it? And that, I think, is a key challenge. And if you are going to be an innovator, and I think it's, we were talking about government, you know, policy doesn't dictate innovation, or doesn't spur innovation, it's really the other way around, right? Innovation should help inform policy. We have to look at that and say, what's your plan to get from proof of concept to commercialization? It's a big step. And I think making sure that you've thought it out and ensure that your innovation actually has a market to address or a readily accessible market to address is key, because you're not going to attract investment if you can't answer that question.
Great point. Jason, you're on the product side too. Do you have anything to add to that?
I guess ultimately, from the consumer standpoint, it's about educating yourself, taking some time. And consumers now, I think, are generally far more educated than they were. But I think I need to do a better job of providing a more broad scope in terms of supporting existing technologies that can integrate their solution into just everyday products, rather than just saying, again, it's polarized. It's like you either have a sustainable product or it's a viewed as a non-sustainable product. I think we could move towards just assuming that we could put that in an economic fashion to all products. I think it would be much more sustainable.
Brad, I think one of the elements of success for any company that's creating products is getting them into stores, getting those products into stores. Could you maybe describe some of the processes around your procurement, your procurement process and what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, one of our criteria and areas of focus, and we can't source everything locally, but that is one of our criteria. We do, are mindful of the kind of practices of who the producers are and who we're getting products from. We want to make sure that these are well-run companies, that they're not doing an ethical business practice. It all ties in with our philosophy of how we're supporting the community. I think one of the other things, and it ties in with, folks within the space that certainly want to scale up. I mean, surety of supply. We sell a lot of product and we hear about it when it's not in the stores, right? Or we hear about it if there's concerns at any points in time with some of the volume that comes through. So for us, that's a big piece of it, is that surety of supply. And the pandemic highlighted that a little bit, is where some of those challenges then come. Do you have enough breadth of suppliers? Can they deliver on their signals? And tied to that, obviously, it has to be cost competitive for us, again, just because of the volume of product and what our customers are expecting. But there's things that we try to follow in terms of supplier rules of conduct, and we try to really hold them to a high standard as well, and make sure that how they operate and how their value set, that it does align with us. So it's not necessarily procure at all costs from whomever. For us, we see it as it's a mutually beneficial long-term business relationship. So that's also at the forefront of our minds based on who we do business with.
So what I'm hearing is, sustainability, purchasing local is an element of that procurement. However, there are other caveats. Obviously, cost is important. Can you supply enough goods to meet demand, etc., etc.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think the question for all three of you, maybe we'll start with David, is, from your experience, what are you seeing on the consumer side? We talk a lot about production of products, procurement of products, but consumer behavior, is that shifting? How's that shifting?
Consumer behavior is something that we want to look at in terms of local, and I think that in Alberta you found that a lot of people are starting to look a lot more local, but consumers are becoming a lot more educated about where their food comes from. Okay, as far as where we're coming from there. I've been to, I'll go to functions, I'll be somewhere, I'll take some strawberries with me, and I'll have strawberries, and some people look at me and they say, I don't eat strawberries anymore, because of the pesticides. Strawberries are normally at the top of the dirty dozen list on the world for chemicals and pesticides, so they're used to ensure that they get enough strawberries to sell, right? And I think that they're that way, and then when people understand where it is, then they're all over it. So I remember being at one Christmas party a year ago, and the lady looked at me and said, I don't eat strawberries, there's too many pesticides. I explained what it was. She took the berries from me and walked around the party and convinced everybody that they had to eat these strawberries, and when we were selling them, they had to go buy these strawberries. So I think that you're seeing that there is a shift in consumer behavior towards that. This is what I want. I want a very high quality, pesticide-free strawberry. And that's what I'm going to buy. I'm not going to buy the other one. So I think there is a shift in consumerism. On the other hand, for some, price is still price. You can't get over that part of it either. So you got to be competitive with both. Trying to be as competitive as possible with those.
Mm-hmm. Jason, how about yourself? What are you seeing in terms of consumer behaviour?
Well, on one hand, on our tech side, obviously we're kind of the only fish in the pond, but on the consumer side, we produce a bar, so it's a very competitive space. There's a lot of players in that space, so you have to provide market differentiation from the other products. And our market differentiation is the sustainable nature of not just the fact that we're associating carbon capture with this bar of soap, but putting sustainable products in it. And I think what I'm seeing from consumers is that they're trying to break through this notion that, look, everybody's gone to a big box store at some point in time and has bought something that said, the catchword, sustainable or eco-friendly or something that caught your eye. You took it and you felt good about that purchase, right? You went home, you washed your car, you washed your hands, or you put fertilizer in your garden, whatever you did. But then the disappointment set in when you realize it didn't work as good as the thing that didn't say sustainable or eco-friendly. So that feeling that you got of wanting to support something was diminished fairly quickly. And you are less likely to go back to buy that brand again, or anything for that matter that is sustainable or eco-friendly, because your experience was less. So what we're seeing now, certainly in our end of things, and we've seen with other competitive brands too, is that when you create a product that is sustainable or eco-friendly, it has to work as good, if not better, than what you would normally buy. And I've become a bit of a soap snob. Before the advent of personal care products, I was the guy that went to the co-op and I bought my 3-bar Irish Spring, and it worked, right? I didn't really care. And then I had the good fortune of meeting Michelle Riegel, who was our formulator, and she put me into these cold processed soaps, and I tried them, and it was amazing. It was a different experience. I mean, you wouldn't think a bar of soap could change your mindset on something as simple as a bar of soap. So what consumers are now looking for is that when they go to the store to buy something that is sustainable or eco-friendly, they're expecting it, and we need to give them the expectation that it is going to perform on par or better than something that they would normally buy that didn't have those catchphrases associated with them. So I think that's what we're starting to see. It's good. It's a really good thing to watch unfold.
So it's not sustainability over the product and how well it performs. We need both.
Absolutely.
Right?
You have to have both. You cannot create a new marketplace with sustainable products if they don't perform as expected. And of course, the economics matter, but people will pay a little bit more for something that's we call it green premium. But again, if it doesn't perform, they'll buy it once and they'll never buy it again. We have repeat customers who come in specifically for our brand because it has not only the sustainable message associated with it, but it has a quality to it that makes you want to come back to buy it again.
And so I'll kind of tag on that. We see the other side of that, right? I mean, we see how consumers, how they spend their dollars and where their wallet's spending their dollars. And I think to the point, you're right. It has to be a quality product too. They may try something just because of the labeling. And what we're starting to do more, especially when we've now launched a new app and can customize offerings to our members based on what their spending patterns are. over the coming years, we're gonna look a lot closer at that data to understand, okay, well, where are the strong areas of interest? You know, because we have it, we're getting a better line of sight to that data. And I think over time, that will likely shape some of our procurement practices. What we'll also be able to see too is, well, what happens depending on store locations, even within Calgary, right? I mean, Calgary's got, you know, we've got stores all over the city and in some communities outside the city. Spending habits are very different, the types of products that are sustainable may be, you know, certain types of products in certain parts of the city that are in the space are desired, and then they're not as, you know, much of a focus in other areas. So that's the bigger opportunity, I think, as a retailer. You know, I mean, we're not here to necessarily steer people's consumer habits, but one of the things we do try to do is educate people on our products, you know, and have that information available. We try to do it with our labeling. We're going to do more of it through our app, and you know, give people the information to make informed choices. You know, within SCAD, I mean, you can write reams of almost academic research if you really wanted to go all the way up and down the supply chain and somebody really wanted to parse it out. But I think that's probably the important part that we play on this is helping educate people and giving them a range of choices. And then over time, we'll see where they spend their dollars and what's of value to them at different points in time.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So let's take a shift to supply chains. You know, one of the big ways in which this industry is trying to be more sustainable is to reduce the supply chain emissions, right? And so there's a lot of conversation around localizing supply chains, making sure that you're well aware of the emissions, you know, across through that value chain. What are some of the challenges, opportunities associated with localizing the supply chain? Maybe David will go to you first.
Well, I think that whole idea of local is not just we're trying to ask people to think about local strawberries, but we're thinking about how do we impact that as locally. So we were able to find a fabricator in Edmonton who's going to fabricates our towers for us. We can do that well rather than importing them from, say, China. Okay? Lighting we can't get made in Alberta, but we can get them from Ontario. So again, we're taking this, how close can we get these different things to run our facility and everything that we need to run our facility. And I think localizing those supply chains becomes a bit of a challenge because, you know, what happens is, again, it comes back to price because now you get inundated that people are getting these lights and I get you them at an X amount of percentage less if we bring them from China. And now you're sitting there going, well, you know, how my capital expenditure versus, you know, where does that come into play? And I really believe that what we've done with our model is to say, look, we're going to factor this in there. It's going to cost us a bit more. It's going to do that, but we know we take it from a local supplier and we can get it there. We also know that we can get service. We also know that we can get follow-up. We can also do a lot of different things because our supplier happens to be right across the city from us or another, you know, within the province from us. And again, I don't think we're going to stop globalization, but I think we do really need to support those businesses we can that are close to us.
Mm-hmm. You know, given that you're in the food space, and Brad, you talked about the importance of your suppliers being able to meet that demand, right? What's happening potentially globally where there is, you know, desertification, there's big changes and disruptions in the food sector where maybe some of these international suppliers can no longer supply. And, you know, can you be that security of local produce on an ongoing basis because of some of these changes that might be happening?
It's a goal that we need to try and reach, I think, in Canada because we rely so much on imports. I mean, if you look at what happens, I mean, if you're not buying something locally, you can be buying grapes from South America, you can be buying blueberries from Chile, because that's where the supply comes from, right? Being able to say, can we replace that? It's a bit of a stretch for us to say we can replace 33 million pounds of strawberries a year. But can we get there? Can we get to 10% of the market? Can we get to 15% of the market? And not just as growth here, but as an industry, right? Can we do more and more as an industry to say, we may not be able to replace all imports, but can we get to a place where we have a bit more food sovereignty? Let's put it that way, right? We own more of the production, and we're not reliant on the supply chains, right? You know, I'm old enough to remember that we didn't get fresh fruit in the middle of winter, you you're eating canned or you're eating preserves, right? But people spent the summer taking all the fresh stuff and turning it into something that would last all winter. So, you know, how can we balance? I think we're gonna have to balance that in some way, because we'll never, I don't think in Canada, will be able to replace all of it, but we could replace a good portion.
And I think to time to that, I think that, you know, and I look at things like the port string, Vancouver is a good example, and nobody's really disclosed, well, how much food actually brought in out there at sea while there's a strip. But I think the idea of, yeah, that level of food sovereignty, if you will, I think is important. So as a retailer, I think for us, you know, having a portion of the kind of market share that we're getting supplied to us, and if it can be local, then that gives us a little more flexibility if there are unanticipated things that happen, right? Whether it can be strikes that impact import and export goods, or it could be, you know, some kind of localized disruption. I think about the floods that happened in the lower mainlands, you know, in the Abbotsford area. Well, then that area produces a lot of ag products, but for a period of time, nothing could get shipped. So if you think about where you're downstream and you're, you know, waiting for stuff to come in, like, well, everything's backed up, like trucks can't get through roads or whatever. So, you know, I think of those kind of impacts that we run into, and that having that level of local production is really like a supply hedge, you know, for lack of a better term, right? And so it gives you that flexibility to work around things. Because you're right, like years ago, and I remember this as a kid growing up on a farm, cold storage, you know, really hole dug in the ground with dirt, you know, and you know, lots of canning of a variety of products that were used, you know, in the winter months because you weren't getting fresh stuff. Now things have taken leaps and bounds where you can produce some of that fresh stuff locally without season and variability. So yeah, I think, you know, that ability to have at least some level of control, but you're right, it's going to be a challenge to produce the pounds and pounds and really tonnage of food to supply everybody. But if you can get a portion of it that is local, you know, that gives you very good. And I think for us as a retailer, that's important.
I think you're both touching on a really interesting point, which is, you know, you're describing that, you know, back in the day you would eat the can of strawberries, you wouldn't get them fresh. It feels like we're in a world now where we want everything and we want it all the time, right? This is the behavior that consumerism has, and do we think that's going anywhere? Do you think there needs to be shifts? And you know what, we can't have this product now, right? Or do we think that there are alternative ways to get the products we want whilst, you know, looking at a sustainable future? Maybe Jason.
I think it's a long haul. You know, I think there's the near-term things that we can achieve, like strawberries, and then there's the longer-term things of that we can do here in Alberta. But Alberta's never really been known from a manufacturing perspective. We typically are a resource province that we export to other places, or we bring in things for consumer good purposes. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done here, and I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. To further your opinion on what's achievable. But for us, for example, a bar of soap, we use like 11 different oils, fatty oils to produce soap. It is necessary to make soap, and there are certain oils that you just can't get anywhere else. Places that have more tropical type weather, like for example, we don't use palm oil, but we do use olive oil. We don't grow olives here. It'd be cool if we did, but we don't. So we have to import. So we make decisions on who we buy from to make sure that they're being sustainable, because that is something that we have to have. Now, does that mean that it's always going to be that way? No, I think eventually, but that's longer term. I don't think we're going to see those problems being solved in the future. I think the near term things are the vertical structured agricultural solutions that we can get for year-round production. I don't think consumer habits are going to change. We are creatures of habit, and it takes a long time to steer that ship. So I think regardless of what's going on in supply chain, I think people are still going to want to get very crafty to figure out how to get that thing from some other country here to satisfy that, you know, that instant gratification that we've all adopted in some form or fashion.
Interesting insights. Maybe let's shift to the scale of financing required to achieve this massive undertaking. You know, one of the reasons local investing LIYYC exists is that we want to deploy capital into businesses like this. factors, right, that are driving that change that we want to see. And we're seeing from our investors that, investors are being more conscious and wanting more impact in where they're putting their dollars. But we need to scale that financing. What does that look like? What are the challenges? How are we going to unlock that financing? Maybe we'll kick it over to Dave. Well, but let's go to Brad. Brad can give us a...
Well, I hope they crack that in terms of the financing, because I think, it's important for that ecosystem to survive and thrive and grow. I think the challenge you've got, and with anything that requires investment dollars is, people want a return and need a return on the funds they get. And I think, we've certainly seen as inflationary pressures have changed and it's impacted people's pocketbooks or their retirement finances or what have you. So, people invest for good causes, but there's a limit on how far they can go with that because they also have to get a return on their dollars. So I think the bigger challenge, and I'd kind of put that out to those that need the investment, is how do you create that, compelling business case that says, hey, there's a few different criteria we satisfy, including a very positive return on investments. And we're going to hold to the values of running our organization while also producing. I think that's I think a big part of the story that needs to get out. I think there's, again, I'll put it to food for thought for those of you that are in that fundraising space, is how do you tap into some of the institutional folks that recognize a need to put money into these types of things? And is it a range of, everything from, institutional or private investors who recognize there's a portion of money that we absolutely need to put into this to help solve that and support that. And we're not going to put, users' terms on that because the success of the business is important. So I think that's how do you tie in with that. I'll use, again, our kind of philosophy as a cooperative and as a member-driven organization. We've got a group of people that have come together with a level of common purpose behind it. And, I think that's part of this. How do you articulate that purpose story while also articulating the investments?
How are we doing on time?
11:15.
So we got 15 minutes left?
Yeah.
Why don't we shift it to the floor for questions? Any questions for any of our panelists? I can keep rolling if there's no question.
I had a question. There's been a lot of change, market pressures over the past few years, and curious to hear from all of you, really, what are you noticing in terms of consumer behavior and some of the changes that are happening as a result of those market pressures?
Anyone want to take that up?
Shorter attention span. I think that's kind of it takes a long time to build up a customer base that associates their buying habits with a particular brand. And I think that time frame is taking longer because there's so many choices. This is a plethora of choices of anything. So I think there was a time, certainly when I was younger, where you would have more loyalty to a particular brand and you would stick with that brand. Whereas now we're seeing, with so many choices available to consumers, it's very challenging to get repeat customers to stick with that brand. You really got to work and invest a lot of time and effort into building that relationship with that customer to keep them coming back. So I'm seeing a bit of a shift in terms of brand loyalty with some consumers.
What kind of strategies do we use to actually get like a better position?
For us, it's a lot of listening. It's a lot of work to listen. It's a lot of work to care about what the customers are saying. And it's difficult sometimes to engage them, to get them to talk, to communicate with them why they made that purchase. And as that community grows, it can get a little bit complicated. So you have to work really hard. I think ultimately it's just listening to your consumer, paying close attention to what they're looking for, and trying your best to try to meet that need.
questions?
You mentioned it is difficult to build up the customer base because it would be very niche for just one product, and collaboration is always a way to group the same or similar purpose behind a consumer together. Is there any, for example, collaboration between brands have similar purpose can go together so that it can be amplified, the customer base, the learning, and also all the crossover? Is there any idea to make this kind of collaboration to make the town bigger?
Well, I can tell you what we do in our stores, so we try to set up the offerings in a way where it might be a range of suppliers, but if it's, let's say something that's, health oriented, or organic oriented, we'll try to cluster that so it's very visual, very clear for people to know, hey, okay, there's my organic produce section. And, there might be a range of suppliers on the shelves there, but at least then they understand. And the nice thing about when we set our stores up is people are, creatures of habit. So once they know their travel pattern through and they know what, those products are, then they know exactly where to find them.
That's so true. We went grocery shopping in a Safeway we've never been before because we were in the neighborhood. We didn't know where anything was. We were so frustrated with the experience. We're like, I'm never coming back here again. I'd rather go to where I always shop because I know where everything is. So that's so true. So true.
Yeah. So that's a big part of it. How do you make it not fresh?
And I think from a collaboration point from a production side, when I think about that, what really separates a successful company from an unsuccessful company, what we do is how well you can control your operating expenses. And it's really key, right? That's where you can live and die by that. So we've actually had conversations with a producer in Edmonton who does leafy greens, lettuces and microgreens, etc. And our conversation was, how can we help to share costs? So we're both going to be sending things to Calgary from Edmonton. Can we share transportation? Can we share a place where we can store things before we distribute to customers in the area? We may have some of the same customers, so why aren't we distributing together when it comes to that way? So the collaboration comes from that point where we can actually work together to be able to keep a control over what our operating expenses are, right? And for the best of us, because obviously I can't collaborate with lettuce, and you can't really collaborate with strawberries from a production point of view, but from that logistical point of view, there's lots of things we can do as small, high-growth companies, right? But we really need to pay attention to where our dollars are.
And that is something we're trying to do as well with our online shopping and our delivery format. So that you can get a range of products. It can be everything from your pharmacy delivery to your grocery delivery, and we'll just try to break it in one stop, one drop off, not multiple people showing up. And it ties in with the whole notion of, well, how do you influence things like greenhouse gas emissions? Well, that's one way to do it, right? Is have that really last mile to get stuff to your door. How do we be efficient with that? Same thing with what do we do with our facilities in terms of energy efficiency and that to help reduce costs and that, which allow us to run a more profitable business.
Because from the production or the retailer perspective, it is always want to collaborate, to empower together, but it is not easy. But from the consumer perspective, it is the same. Sometimes if we want to have some conscious shopping, maybe we also have to do our own research. So we have to find which clothes or which fruit or which soup we want to buy if we really have this kind of conscious mindset behind. So that it is also a missing link because in between not only the producer but also the consumer also pay effort to make this kind of research behind it. So I'm just thinking if there is a marketplace or some platform can put the thing together, it is also a way to make the power or the education, the influencer much more bigger in that way.
I'm working on that.
Brilliant.
Yeah, this was the thing.
Well, I'd love to hear some thoughts on that. is it the job of the consumer to be doing their research? Is it the job of the producer to make sure that the products are sustainable? Like, what's the balance there?
I mean, from our end, it's recognizing that we're busy. You're working a 10-hour day to make ends meet. So you have a limited amount of time to educate yourself on your buying choices. So you have to make sure that your message is succinct and to the point and really clear. Not everybody has the ability to sit down and spend much time to figure out what is the best choice for their family in terms of their buying habits. So I think the bulk of that responsibility still falls on the producers to do that. But not 100% of that falls on our shoulders. It falls on the consumers just to a degree as well. So I think it depends on the demographic.
Totally agree. And also, as you mentioned, apart from the sustainability, it also has to be a very good product so that.
Totally.
Yes.
Yeah, you can't produce a crappy product. It does a disservice to all of us. Right? You associate, you have one bad experience, you associate it with all of them, anything associated with that tag word or that look that made you buy it in the first place. And you have to work like crazy to be able to get that consumer to come back to buy that product again, even if it's not even your product.
But a good thing is that most of this kind of sustainability product, they really do a good job. Yes, I appreciate it.
I want to get one last question in before the end. One last question, because we haven't talked about the future, and I think that's really important. You know, my last question would just be, you know, what do you think the future holds in this space? Maybe we'll start with you, David.
Well, I think we're talking about consumers, looking at consumer behavior and how we're going. I believe that it's going in the right direction. I believe that people now have more of I call it a healthy skepticism, and that is, you know, look at what you're looking at and ask why. You know, if you go in and buy something and all of a sudden it's like, this is 80% off. And ask yourself a question, why is it 80% off? Is there something behind it? Is there a question I need to be asking about this in order to understand, yes, I'm going to save some money on it, but what am I ultimately buying? And I think people are having that more healthy skepticism and really looking and researching what they buy. And that's, I think that's healthy for the local grower, the local producer. So I do actually see a bright future.
I think it creates more competition and more choice. And I think the other opportunity it creates is that ability to go and touch and feel and see where things are happening. Right? You know, it's one thing to, you know, get organic bananas at the store. It's another thing to be able to go and drive by, well, hey, there's where they're producing stuff locally in terms of strawberries. And I like drive by the plant, or we have to drive by Edmonton. But I think then it becomes more of a, well, hey, now I'm curious about it. Now I want to go educate it. Now I want to go and see, do they do a tour? It's an opportunity to leverage the school system and help, you know, youth understand how does food production actually work, because it doesn't happen in the storeroom at the grocery store. I mean, I only say that because I grew up on a farm, so I understand it, but my kids didn't. So you know, I'm constantly educating them about how some of these things work. So I think that's the other great opportunity, because the more you can educate people and the more they understand it, it's local, they have the opportunity to touch and feel it, the more empowered they're going to be with those kinds of choices and understand what questions to ask around how those choices then kind of trickle through broader impacts in society.
I love that. Jason, final thoughts?
I think sustainability will become less and less of an option and more of a just, there is no other choice. You are required to buy something that has been regulated or mandated or implemented in some form or fashion. So I think the idea of having an option of purchasing something that is sustainable today, in the future will just be a matter of going to the store and buying anything that isn't.
Excellent. Well, thank you, the three of you. That was really insightful. Thanks for our audience and the great questions. Okay, round of applause.